The United States has changed. The recent Dobbs case, Supreme Court ruling, overturned Roe versus Wade, basically canceling out the last 50 years of abortion protocols for the United States. What does this mean for Christianity? Is this a victory? Are we done? What else should happen? And what about the detractors? What about those who say that Christians really don't care about all the things that come after birth? What about the health of the mother? And what about the objections that those on the left would raise? We're going to tackle all of these questions and more on this Come Let Us Reason podcast. Well, welcome everyone to the Come Let Us Reason podcast. A little different format, just for those who are joining us. We have been podcasting Come Let Us Reason for, well, since 2006, quite a while. And mostly it's been directly teaching messages that I have brought from different venues over the many years. But we wanted to do something a little bit more personal, a little bit more conversational, and a lot more current, being able to respond to current events. Now, one of the big changes, as you can see, is I have some co-hosts with me. So let me introduce each one of them in turn. First is Raymond Gregory, who's been a longtime friend. Raymond and I did a session a couple of years ago where we reviewed church history and things like that. And this topic specifically is going to be near and dear to your heart, I know, based on how you grew up, but not only that, how your family has recently expanded. So first of all, Ray, welcome. Anything you want to say about, what you do, your ministries and things of that nature?
Yeah. So we met at Harvest.
We met back when you were like 16 years old in your first band trying to...
That's true. Yeah, so...
at Chris Lopez's party. Yeah.
That's right. Well, we started working together at
Yes,
Harvest,
there you
go. And you've been influential. Your ministry's been influential in, shaping my faith. I think about it a lot, I do. I really do. The big thing is just being able to reason into faith.
Yeah.
I am constantly in my head thinking about things, and so having the opportunity to be able to do that in an intellectual way is something I never had growing up in the church. It's always Bible stories and curriculum and stuff like that, but it's like, why do you believe what you believe? And so Come Reason has been a big, proponent of helping me do that. Anyway, so we met at Harvest. I was a worship leader at Harvest for 10 years. And now I've left there about 4 years ago to be at Calvary Chapel East Anaheim, to be a worship pastor. So I do worship, but I'm also a teaching pastor there. I do a lot of teaching. We have a school discipleship. And it's funny you mentioned church history. I ended up teaching church history at our school discipleship over there. And so that's been a blessing. And so that's another way that you've helped me and bring me along. So it's been a blessing there. And so I'm doing that. I am currently finishing up a master's degree in theology, which is a blessing.
And a lot of work.
And a lot of writing and a lot of reading.
Yes.
A lot of reading stuff that I don't want to read, but I have to still read. And a lot of stuff I really love reading.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm in a worldview class right now.
Oh, wow.
I'm writing a paper on social justice in the church. And so all this stuff's pinging around in my head right now.
Okay, that's perfect. That's great. That's great. And you also do music. I do music, and I also do everything I just mentioned is what I also do. So yeah, I've been a musician, pretty much my whole life. And so we're actually sitting here in my newly constructed studio. And so I have records out. Yeah, happily married. Got some decent airplay and things like that.
It was popular in my mom loved it, and so that's all that matters.
So if you want to find out more, go to raymondgregory.com, right? And
I think it's still there.
You can hear some of the tracks and things like that. Okay. Also joining us today is a longtime friend and partner, Dominique Aguiar. Dom, we've known each other, oh my gosh, forever.
Yeah, I remember meeting you, goodness, I want to say it was probably 91, 92. you were working at Chino Lumber and
Yeah.
Hardware. Was fresh out of high school, or actually I was still in high school. I remember starting there as a summer gig, and met you there and kind of developed our relationship from that point on. Like Ray said, I was heavily influenced by both yourself and many others there at that location. I think the Lord just really assembled an amazing group of people there at Chino Lumber, and he kind of utilized that as an opportunity to meet me where I was at. I knew that I had a lot of issues and questions, and there's some personal testimonies that I won't get into now that just really, that was the, I'll just call it the trigger that just kind of fired everything off. So it really caused me to reconsider where I was at, to give thanks for a lot of answered prayers that went up prior to that engagement, and from that point forward, having yourself and many others there kind of assist in developing me or discipling me, and taking me on it, not necessarily as a project, but just under their wing, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it was really a foundational time for me. And then from that point forward, I just continue to hammer it out and continue to develop and grow. And I'm still developing, still growing many years later. But yeah, I am.
And the interesting part of your story is you're actually a first generation American.
Correct.
So
Yeah, so I'm Portuguese American, or American from Portuguese descent is what I like to say. My parents came from the Azorean Islands, very religious, and they came over in the 70s. My dad went back, married my mom in 72, and then I was born in 74, 2 years later. So, and then...
And didn't speak English for the first 5 years of your life.
Yeah, that made it a difficult struggle for me as far as education goes. I was always behind, just in everything, whether it was math. My dad was really good at math, and he tried to school me, but things were a little bit different with how he learned math versus how my teachers were trying to explain it to me.
That was even before new math, so I mean...
Yeah, right? There was nothing fuzzy about that. But anyhow, yeah, so that's where I'm at. My dad has since passed away. My mom is still around, and
you've been with Come Reason basically since the inception. You helped us form the organization and things like that. So you've been part of that voice for quite a while. So I'm glad you guys are here, and I think you can both really contribute to the conversation. We're just going to have a really interesting time talking about this and hearing all the ideas that are coming along in terms of the Dobbs decision, because obviously the blowback from it's radical. First of all, there were two rulings that were overturned by this recent Dobbs decision. There was Roe v. Wade, and there was Casey, Planned Parenthood versus Casey. So in order to understand that, I'll just give a quick summary of what happened. Prior to Roe versus Wade, abortion was a question that was left to the specific states. Some states would make it illegal to have abortions. Some states would make it illegal to have abortions after a certain date, maybe 14 weeks of pregnancy, things of that nature. But it was understood and generally regarded as a question that was left to the states, and our Constitution understood it to be something that wasn't necessarily federally mandated. The argument in Roe versus Wade came out was that there was a inherent right of women to be able to choose an abortion, therefore states can't push the law, right? So Jane Roe was chosen by Planned Parenthood as a test case, really. Much like the Scopes monkey trial, they were advancing her cause in order to get the law established that it would be federally mandated that abortion must be allowed through all 9 months of pregnancy. And
not to interrupt, but if I remember correctly, I think there was a couple of different cases that were attempting to get up to that point to have that decision
Yes.
made. It just so happened that Roe versus Wade ended up being the one that
the one, yeah.
was.
But the goal, the point, I guess, yeah, you're right. There were several because, and we saw this in the Obergefell decision. Usually, these are cases that a larger politically motivated legal entity will come under and say, we're going to make this one, we're going to try to get all the way to the Supreme Court in order to achieve our goals. And so there were several that they were running.
And if I remember right too, the goal was to try to change the definition of health initially so that they can have it approved, so that if you weren't financially quote unquote fit to be able to have a child, then that definition would fit that new version of health.
Yeah, abortion wasn't
Mental,
considered
emotional, financial health. So
Yes.
they wanted to broaden that definition in order to make it more palatable, as it were.
right, because if abortion is simply a birth control procedure, then it's not broadly understood as necessary health. Right, just like a nose job isn't necessary.
Right.
It's
elective abortion.
It's an elective
versus
procedure. So if it becomes health, then it becomes more incumbent and harder to argue against allowing it and saying it's a person's right because their person has a right to health. And that's really how Roe changed the debate. That's really how it refocused. What it also did, though, was it took the decision out of the purview of the voters, right? Because you can't vote on this anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So now the question becomes, and there is, unfortunately in our society, there is an idea that if something is legal, it's somehow moral. And we don't talk about that a whole lot, but that's really strange. That's always bothered me.
Yeah.
What do you guys think on that? How much did Roe influence people to accept abortion because it was legal and therefore they could justify it as moral?
Yeah. It's dangerous waters to start legislating morality. You should be legislating from morality.
Yes, there you go.
Instead of legislating into morality. It's like, well, the state says it's okay, so it is okay. The state says it's not okay, so it isn't okay. And so
I often tell people, you know what, adultery is legal, but that doesn't make it right.
Exactly. There's a lot of things that are all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. Is that what it? So the interesting thing that I think most people aren't talking about is, if you just break it down to brass tacks, like, what is the job of the federal government? What is the job of the state government? I'm not a political science major by any means, but this is basic stuff that everybody should understand. Really, the federal government should protect our borders and then protect our rights. So the dangerous thing that's happening with the Roe decision 50 years ago is basically telling us abortion is an intrinsic right flowing from the Constitution.
Right.
Which is absolutely untrue. You won't find any language in the Constitution. It's funny, we have all these little pocket constitutions. My wife, we're actually using this studio as a homeschool room as well. And so we have tons of copies of the Constitution. My kids were reading the Federalist Papers together and all this kind of stuff. And so I never really took an interest in much of that until she started teaching it. And I hear them reading it. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, especially now that we're kind of moving more into a federalist kind of society.
Yeah,
hopefully we are.
More and more.
So the dangerous thing with that is now we're saying abortion is a right. And once you tell somebody they have a right to something and then it goes away, that upsets the established order. Yeah. That really makes people angry. And the problem is it was such a bad decision. I think they kind of worked with this idea of the right to privacy.
That was in Casey. So that was the case that bolstered Roe in the 1990s. That was one of the times where the pro-life folks were trying to get Roe undermined with their case. And what happened was, the justices recognized that Roe was because they started on health, as you said, they started arguing that, well, if we look at the past history, there is no long-standing understanding of abortion as being something that's permissible as a health approach. Matter of fact, most states, if you look at their history up all the way until Roe, most states had restrictions against it. So part of what they were arguing said that the actual Roe decision was based on bad law and bad logic. And the Dobbs decision, Alito points to that. He actually underscores that. And he says this is why Casey turned around and argued that there's a right to privacy, that everything falls under the 14th Amendment. Casey basically said that's where we have to plant our flag. Yeah. And so they find this right to privacy, that you have some certain bodily autonomy, and that's how Casey becomes part of it.
Well, that's the only way you can do it, because there is no right to an abortion in the Constitution. So now you have to bring it under another right. And so so the argument, I feel like people are arguing from different bases. Some people are arguing and say, no, we just wanted to go back to the states and then they can vote. And then the other side is arguing and say, you shouldn't be able to vote on a right.
Yes.
Right? And so now people are saying, well, this doesn't end abortion. It just brings it back to the state, which is 100% true. And I think it's a good thing to do. I think that's what's beautiful about our democratic republic. If you don't like what's going on in your state, you can move. Now, obviously,
or vote out whoever's managing your state.
Now, obviously, logistically, that's not possible for a lot of people, but
But that's only applicable to things that are actual rights.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's a good question. So let's talk about what is a right, because I think there's a lot of confusion here. The Supreme Court gives us the right to have an abortion. The Supreme Court takes away the right. No. Can you give and take away rights as the founders understood them? And there are, so what do we mean when we say right? Are there different kinds of rights? That's a really good question.
The founders referred to the inalienable rights.
Well, okay,
so endowed by our
Creator. Yeah. So, I mean, there's an objective, I'll call it objectivity related to our rights. Mm-hmm. It's not subjective. It's not based off of how you feel, what you want. It's not objective or subjective morality, but it's an objective morality. It's bound to an outside source, which is the author of all things, God, our Creator. Everything is grounded in God as far as our morals are concerned. Mm-hmm. And the founders knew that. They were smart. They weren't some silly guys coming together, putting a system together that just, whatever, they were well thought out. And they knew if it's grounded in something outside of government, then government doesn't have the ability to manipulate those rights. So the way I view it, and just so I can preface, I understand that there's a spectrum of views on this, right? You have some people, and I don't want to come off as like arrogant, or my natural default is to be rude and very arrogant, and it's just very, I'll call it on an intellectual level, it's either right or it's wrong.
So you're black and white.
Pretty much. I mean, that's my general default. So I have to be sensitive.
So we want to invite you back.
We have to be sensitive, basically, to the other folks that are on that spectrum. You have some, which I don't mind being arrogant, rude, or very frank about stuff with certain people, depending on where you stand on that spectrum, right? Okay. You have some people that they've been lied to for so long.
Sure. Okay.
They've been told that, hey, it's just, all it is just tissue.
Right.
And then they've kind of bought into that. They're not intentionally trying to be pro-abortion.
So let's back up and talk about a little bit of that. So the way I see it, really we can make a distinction between types of rights. There are certain rights that you have that are endowed to you because of maybe your position. So for example, police officers, highway patrol, they are not obliged to hold to the speed limit, right? So if you're driving on the highway, how are you going to catch an 80 mile an hour speeder? You got to go 80 miles an hour if you're a highway patrol officer, right?
Yeah.
So highway, you can't give a highway patrol officer a ticket for speeding.
You can actually.
Well,
My dad got a ticket in his squad car
really.
driving when he was driving very fast. But anyway, yes,
But
you
if
can.
if you're going, if another officer views that you're outside of the
Yeah.
parameters of safety, what have you. But in general, there are certain rights that you are endowed with. For example, when you get married, you have access and rights to your spouse that you would otherwise not have, based on position. There are other rights. And the rights that we're talking about are those that are outgrowths or are common based on who you are, what kind of thing you are. And we say that we have these inalienable rights, right? These are different kind of rights than where alienable rights that can be taken away because they're temporary, they're tangible, they're based on circumstance. So tangible rights can be taken away. If you get divorced, you no longer have the right to impose yourself on your spouse in the same way that you would maybe
like circumstance and potentially offered authority.
Right.
Whereas,
but inalienable rights are a reflection of your, I'm going to use a 50-cent word here, your ontology of who you are as an individual, how you're created. Mm-hmm. And the reason why those rights can't be taken away by government is because they come from a source that transcends all governments. Mm-hmm. So one of the rights that we have, as we recognize as people, is the right to not be oppressed by our government. Mm-hmm. So if government can bestow rights and take away rights, then the right of not being oppressed no longer applies because it's the government that's doing it, if the government is the highest law in the land. But there is a law above the law. This is what they said at the Nuremberg trials, right? This was the famous defense that the Nazis offered. How come you let this stuff happen? How come you didn't, why did you? Well, we were following orders, was their argument. We were following orders, and you are supposed to, in a society, follow the law and follow orders. And the judges in the Nuremberg trial said, well, there is a law above man's law to which we're all beholden. Yeah. So there's inalienable rights. And I think this is where people get confused, is they think that all rights are tangible or alienable. And that's not correct. So there are different kinds of rights, but the rights that we're talking about, and even in the Declaration, it's very clear. The first is life. Right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. So if there is a right to life, then that draws into the question of abortion. Wait a minute, whose rights are we stomping on? And one of the interesting pieces that comes out of the Dobbs decision, if you read Alito's arguments, is he says, in all of the cases that Casey cited, and in all of the cases that Roe cited, first of all, none of them had anything dealings with abortion at all. But more so, none of them even came into an idea where there is a conflict of rights where life is involved. And even if you call it potential life, which is the way some of the proponents of abortion will frame it, that still is a big difference when talking about the right to privacy. Does the right to life supersede the right to privacy? Yeah, in most cases it actually does. And that was...
play that out, right? Let's play that out a little bit. So, if it didn't, can you privately murder somebody in another room?
Well, or does your right to privacy,
you're still infringing on the rights of the other individual if you go to murder somebody.
Yeah, he knew my secret, so I can kill him.
Right. But I did it in a private manner. But you're still, what about the privacy rights to the individual that you murdered, right? So in essence, the way I view it is you're infringing upon the rights of the individual within the other individual. Yeah. So that baby also has rights.
Probably the best example in our system right now that shows that the right to life supersedes the right to privacy is, why can I not euthanize myself? Why can I not why is it illegal? It's kind of funny to think that it's illegal to commit suicide in a lot of places.
Yes, in a lot of places.
So why
not
is
in all
it
places.
illegal to commit suicide, but it's illegal
Right. I
to
think
commit
that's a better
infanticide? You know,
Yeah.
to use a titular term. But yeah, so
Well, and
obviously,
infanticide is an interesting question. I mean, in the 1990s, when I bring this up now, it's unfortunate that people have forgotten this reference, but the Susan Smith case was huge. Now, Susan Smith was, for about a week,
you just made that name up right now.
No.
Susan Smith, really?
That was her name.
Okay.
She was a mother.
What ethnicity do you think Susan Smith was?
Yeah, she was not a soul sister, let me tell you that. she was pretty much turkey breast sandwich on Wonder Bread with mayonnaise. She was completely. But
They're the worst.
Here's what happened. For a week, she was on the television. She had a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old, and she had claimed that a black man had carjacked her car and taken her kids. And big police search going on, things like that. After a week, they found the car and the children still strapped in their car seats in a lake, drowned. The investigation rolled on, and it turned out Susan Smith had lied. She had actually done this to her children herself because she wanted to get on with her life and have a new boyfriend, and the boyfriend didn't want to have children. So she actually killed her children in order to engage in her right to privacy and mental health in order to advance herself. Now, that was hideous. Everybody agrees that's hideous. But when we talk about abortion, is it the same thing? Is it the same kind of thing, but in a different degree? So it can either be a different kind of thing or the same kind of thing in a different degree. Some people would argue it's a different kind of thing because here are these kids, they've already had life, they can talk, they can experience. That may be true, but if they were talking about human life, then it's really broadly falls into, it may not be, I'm not saying that abortion is exactly the same as driving your children into a lake. I don't think that's true. Just like I don't think that shooting someone in the heat of the moment is the same thing as going into a school and hunting down people. Those are vastly different in their motivations, but they're still both murder. They're still both taking a human life.
Yeah, because one is born out of convenience and self-interest. The other is born out of panic and desperation.
And sometimes, as Dom pointed out, there's a little bit of self-justification going on.
Sure.
That you're not, you're buying the lie that's being sold to you. So, but that's the question that we're talking about here. Does that make it any better? Does that change the fundamentals, which is murder is murder? And if we're talking about human life, and that's why I always refer to it when I talk to what is the fetus? What if it's not a human person? And you got to be careful because the word person sometimes is loaded. So I say the fetus is a human being. It is a distinct human being. And we don't kill human beings for convenience.
Now, I do want to make the distinction here. There are folks who don't, because they've bought into the lie, they've done it, and in all honesty, they really believe that it's not a human. They don't believe it's, their conscience is clear, so to speak. These folks have just been lied to and are of that view. And I want to reiterate that just like us as believers, to a certain degree, we're guilty for what we know. Right?
So we all have biases.
Yeah, we have biases, but what we know is true. It kind of shapes and forms our consciousness to allow us to be comfortable with something. Right. So in some cases, like that spectrum I referred to earlier, you have people that have been lied to that honestly believe that it's not an individual, and that person has just been lied to, and they've been programmed, so to speak, and indoctrinated by our culture to think that way. Now, my attitude towards them is heartwarming, it's loving. But then you have the other side of the spectrum where, like the other day I saw on YouTube, no, I take that back, I think it was Instagram, a lady, talking to a large group of people and just saying, rip that bastard out and out of your womb, and
Yeah.
knowing that it's a life, being aware of it and not caring. At that point, I have a different attitude towards individuals like that. I'm a little more cutthroat.
Yeah.
You pray for discernment and you ask, Lord, is this a turning table moment? Or do I turn the cheek moment? Or do I refer to the individual like at the well and say, hey, go and sin no more?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I knocking tables over and telling the Pharisees, hey, this is garbage. Righteous anger is appropriate at that moment.
Yeah,
so that spectrum is there. We have to be sensitive to that spectrum. My goal isn't to hammer everybody, but the folks who are just outright blatant about, hey, rip them out and who cares, that's not acceptable.
Well, you brought up a good point just right there. That dichotomy is when Jesus always dealt kindly and gently with people who did not know,
Right.
or people who were in sin, struggling, but did not know the word. Now, when he went to the Pharisees, now they did know, so now he dealt more harshly with them.
Right.
And so, like this lady that's saying, "Rip this," she has an air of, yeah, she knows, but she doesn't care.
Right.
So we need to deal more harshly with those. We should preface everything with love, otherwise we're a clinging symbol.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's as old as the pages of the Bible, right? What was the first sin? When you boil it down, you could be like God. Basically, you could be your own God.
Yeah.
You could have
In
autonomy
control.
over your life. You could do whatever you want to do. You can call the shots, right? That's the first sin. What's the second sin recorded in the Bible?
Well, in general, murder is
So you see, you can become like God. You can be your own purveyor of truth, purveyor of morality. Did God really say? That's the other thing.
Right.
Questioning, did God really say? And then outflows that. What's the next thing? Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
Blood cries out to me.
Which
from the
makes
ground.
sense, because if you think about Genesis chapter 9, God himself asserts that it is only my prerogative to take life. I give life, and therefore I will take it. Therefore, the blood is not something that you should spill. If a man spills a man's blood, by his blood, he's required to pay for it, that kind of thing. And so it is the ultimate, it makes sense. It's a direct line between, if I want to be my own God, then therefore I need to be able to control life, mine or someone else's. Yeah. And that's part of the issue. So I want to come back to a little bit of what you say. I think that's true. I agree that people have been lied to. I also think, though, that we have to be a little careful, because some people use the lie as an excuse to not go any farther. I mean, one of the things that God did endow us with is the ability to reason, to check things out. So the Roman Catholics have an interesting scenario, because they start to question, well, when then does the baby become a person? Is it when they take their first breath? Really? Is it so 2 minutes before they come through the birth canal, they're no longer a person, but they are, And what they say is, look, in any moral situation, if you're going to say blow up a building that's, slated for demolition, you can't say, well, I'm not sure if there's homeless people sleeping in there, but I don't think there are, so I'm going to blow it up anyway. Yeah. It is incumbent upon you not to blow it up,
Very good point.
right? So you don't throw the grenade in the room until you know that there are no people in there. If there's a question, you wait.
Yes.
And that's part of the problem with this issue, is because people have used the excuse, well, it's not a person, and they stop. Conversely, one of the biggest things that have changed and swayed the opinion of most people, because in the late 70s, This wasn't considered, I mean, the evangelical church wasn't on board in a concerted effort in an organized way on this. It was a secondary issue. It was really the Roman Catholics were engaged with it, but it became more and more a part of our understanding of our faith, which I think is good because, as you and I know, historically Christianity has always
been pro-life.
We were scooping up babies when they were abandoned by the Tiber River in the Roman era, and that confused everybody. And I'll get back to that. But more importantly is that when ultrasound came in, when the ultrasound, that was a game changer because you had women who said, it's only a clump of cells. Exactly. And then the Crisis Pregnancy Center said, let me show you. Mm-hmm. And they started showing them. And that made a huge difference. Well, I can see the beating heart. Then what happened was you had an entire generation of young mothers who, as part of their obstetrician's visits, would have an ultrasound, right? That became part of your pregnancy protocol. Mm-hmm. You would just, so it became a whole lot harder when you're seeing this picture. Matter of fact, our OB in the 90s, he had a little ultrasound machine in his office, and when we would go for our first visit at like 8 weeks, he would just pull it out just real quickly, say, see, here's the baby, and you can see the little heart still moving, and right, and at 8-9 weeks. And he was really intelligent in that because a lot of women fret, am I really pregnant? Maybe this test is wrong. But when you see it, they knew it.
Yeah.
And so you have an entire generation of people who were raised seeing that. Now it becomes a whole lot harder to tell yourself, oh, it's just a clump of cells, because everybody has seen an ultrasound. We know what it looks like. Even though the Lennart Nielsen photo series in 1965, Time Life, I don't know if you guys, he did the photographs of babies in utero. It was groundbreaking at the time. Life was the big publication that had it. His photos, I think, are still used today. But it was full color inside. He actually used cameras inside the womb. I don't know how he did it. It was just amazing. Wow. Those were around, but nobody pointed to them.
Sure.
But the ultrasound was become so commonplace that people just couldn't argue against it.
I think what you're saying, I really feel like the Lord's kind of leading this, only because as soon as I'm thinking something, you're kind of saying the same thing I was thinking. So in essence, what I was going to say, I wanted to be fair to non-believers as well, and not just believers, and give them the credit where the credit is due. Because technology started changing, and now that ability to see the baby in the womb at early on stages, it helps confirm in their soul and in their mind that, hey, it is it's not a small section of tissue, or and that informs them further. And then there's that decision. That's why there's a lot of success going the opposite direction now, is because you have these folks that they don't really have a real moral value system that they're kind of abiding by. They're just going in, they see the baby, and they're like, I can't give this up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really changing minds, and fortunately for us, we're making a huge headway in that regard. Culturally, I think things are starting to shift where even non-believers are going that direction, because in their soul, I mean, the Lord says that, and I think it's Romans 1, that you can tell that his existence is there based on the world around us. And I feel like in the same way, there's something innate in us that shows and shares with us and says, hey, this is not right if you cut this off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, scriptures say, I've placed eternity in the heart of man.
Right.
What are the two things that last forever? God's people and God's word. And so we've been talking a lot about, objective truth and morality. Well, the thing that's been placed in the heart of man, whether you like it or not, is a pursuit of truth. And that should be found in God's word, because that will be eternal. Yeah. But then also God's people. We know that the purpose of being created in the image of God is to be fruitful and multiply, to increase the glory of God. And so one of our main purposes in life is to replicate, is to is to literally make disciples, to make more little images of God to increase for the increase of His glory. The Greek word there is selim. It's the same word for idol. And so you see God say, don't make an idol. Why is it so important that we don't make an idol? Because we are already the image, the representation of God. And so if we want to increase that and enjoy Him even more, then we have children. And so those two things exist on the heart of every man, and everybody has that innate desire in them, whether they're lied to or not. And so, like you said, you could be, it's like Thomas Aquinas says, there's natural virtues and then grace virtues. That would be a natural virtue right there, to know that life means something and that we exist to see it live on. So
if we take it from a theological perspective, I think you're right. Think of it this way: the greatest act of creation that God ever achieved was creating man in His own image. I mean, the Bible shows that was the pinnacle of what He did. Matter of fact, even in the order in the book of Genesis, that becomes the last thing that God does, and then He rests, because everything that He's made was good, and it goes into that order where, so if creating man is the pinnacle of God's achievement, His greatest act of creation in that respect, not all achievement, but His greatest creative act, then us creating humans is truly mirroring the image of God here. It is the best way that we can mimic what God would have us do. And as you said, it was commanded. Psalm 139, of course, is the primary scriptural reference that we look to this, that before
I was formed,
you formed me in my mother's womb, before I had my thoughts, you knew me. You had written my days for me from the beginning to the end. So Psalm 139 talks about an in utero individual, that David reflecting back on. Even in utero, he was him. And so he sees himself as an image bearer prior to birth, which is why, again, the Christian position and the Jewish position, for the most part, have been that was important. Now, there are arguments that historically some of the different denominations had tied pregnancy to quickening, and in other words, quickening is when you feel the baby move, and you could possibly do an abortion beforehand. Those are a little bit specious, but again, is that even so? I think that's more of a technology argument, that we wouldn't know whether the baby was there and whether she was pregnant, because obviously there's other reasons why women would not fall into their monthly cycle, and you might have to have some medical intervention for that. So I think that's a little bit ad hoc. I think it's clasping at straws. It doesn't necessarily follow.
Yeah. The more words you need to support your position on such a simple thing that's intrinsic to every person that's ever lived in the history of mankind, it's Occam's razor. The most simple. Is it a baby? Well, are you pregnant? Yes. It's a human. You know, that's it. Like it's not that hard. I think the more words you need to use, the more logic you need to employ to try to justify things. It just sounds a lot. It just sounds a lot like a deception to me. Yeah.
Just to kind of go into how I view this whole ruling. So, the ruling came out, and after a ruling comes out, everyone's quick to kind of react, and maybe they're just well thought out, and they can already kind of pin, as it were, their kind of categorize their views in a way. For me, it takes a while for me to just kind of think things through, and so the ruling came out, and I love listening to talk radio. My goal is to help shape and form myself, my mind, and so that I can be of help to other people, right? So I'm hearing everybody just elated over the decision, and it was, I agree. I think it was it was helpful for babies everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it was the right decision. I disagree with the decision. It's, in my opinion, like you were alluding to earlier, rights, the Constitution protects our fundamental rights. If the right to life, as you referred to in the Declaration of Independence, is in fact a right, then the baby itself also has a right. If the baby has a right, then that right shouldn't be given or treated from a state to state basis. So in my view, it shouldn't be a state decision. It should be protected by the Constitution, and it should be the law of the land that you can't perform abortions. Let me qualify, elected abortions. Because there are going to be that less than 1% of folks whose lives, mothers who are on the table on their life.
Yeah, and that's
decision. It's very minimal. I understand it's less than 1%, but it still requires me to throw that word in there that it's an elected abortion, right?
Yeah.
So in my view, in the same way that your life is protected by the Constitution and it's not based off of a state by state mandate, then my view, the correct decision would have been to say across the board, abortion is illegal in every state.
Yeah.
For 40 years, we went the opposite direction. We said across the board, abortion is legal.
Right.
Right? So, we went the opposite direction. Now we kind of rested in the middle, and maybe that's a God thing. Maybe it's allowing maybe God's allowing culture to catch up with information and
So,
technology,
for example,
so that it's acceptable.
For divorce, because of your hard heart, God allowed divorce, but it was never intended by Him.
Yeah.
So, and I think in a secular society, and we'll talk about this next time, there's some leeway that you have to draw on that. But I hear what you're saying, because it would be the same as saying, well, we're just going to leave slavery up to the states.
Yeah.
We're just not going to federally mandate slavery.
Or the Second Amendment, right? Or the
So-
Second Amendment should be, in my view, protected across the board, regardless of what the state's view are on it.
Yeah. Well, and that's a different issue that we should come to at some point. But before we have to close, I do want to talk about a couple of things about going forward. How do we, number one, are we done? As you're saying, maybe there's more work to do so that abortion is understood as a right to life issue for all human beings. And when everyone understands that,
It needs to be culturally unthinkable.
right, because exactly.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here as Christians? And I definitely want to, as I teased at the beginning, hear a little bit more about your story, because you just adopted a foster baby. Now you hear the charges that Christians somehow don't care about what happens to the mother and the baby afterwards. They do, as long as she doesn't have the abortion, then she can suffer and go off and not go to college, or whatever the scenarios may be. First of all, I've never understood this objection, because if you go to any church and say, I'm a young mother and I don't have any formula, I don't have any diapers, the church will give that stuff to you. Matter of fact, churches have been doing that forever.
Oh yeah.
This is part of their ministry that they've done. And then you have crisis pregnancy centers that will support new mothers up to 2-3 years sometimes. Really get them on their feet, give them all the supplies that they need, check up on them, help them out in those issues.
Oh yeah.
But also Christians are more likely, more statistically more available for adoptions and to be foster care parents. Now, Ray, tell us your story and kind of how you came into the foster system.
Yeah, it's interesting you just mentioned that if you show up to a church and you're a woman, we have a slide that plays at the beginning of every one of our services. Is are you expecting? Let us know. And then there's a place you can go and let us know. And we get those emails, each of the pastors, and they say, okay, who's going to handle this? Who's going to start a meal train? Who's going to get?
Okay.
And we call them, make sure they get what they're needing. Most of the people that call are married people that have been coming to our church, but it's open to literally anybody that walks through those doors and say, are you expecting? We're going to take care of you. So a little bit of my background. My parents adopted my youngest sister and my youngest brother from the foster care system. My youngest brother was 18 months old. His name was Michael. And so we got to see kind of the darker side of the foster care system from the perspective of somebody who's going to foster a child. It was hard. We had him from 18 months to about 4 years old. And then an aunt came out of the woodworks and said, I'll take him. And they ripped him right out of our house.
So it was biological aunt.
Biological aunt. Stuck him with the aunt. She decided after a few weeks, this is not working out for me.
Too much work. Yeah.
Too much work, because he was a lot of work. Just his personality, And so she was in a different county, so she put him back in the foster care system. And so he ended up in a different foster home.
They didn't even call you back.
They didn't even call us back.
Wow.
Ended up in a different foster home. My mom found out about it because it was across counties, worked with a social worker to get him back in our home. And so he was out of our home for about 4 months, which was crazy. Can you imagine like your son or daughter?
It's terrible.
All they know is your home, and then they end up in some other home twice. We got him back, found belt marks on his back, a lot of bad stuff. So we've seen the dark side of the foster care system. And then we've also seen such a beautiful story. So my sister, we got a call the night before Thanksgiving, and they said, hey, we got a baby. We found her in needles. She's drug addicted. We just need a place to take her for a few days. And you're the only place that has answered, because it's the night before Thanksgiving. So they brought her. Her name's Summer. And she just celebrated her 27th birthday. She lives in Seattle right now.
Yeah, that's right.
We had the opportunity to adopt her after, a few years going through the system. And that one moved pretty smoothly. She was with us the whole time. So we got to see two stories. Now, Michael, after we got him back, was diagnosed with HIV and ended up dying shortly before his 8th birthday. And so we celebrated my sister's 27th birthday. We would have celebrated my brother's 30th birthday just 2 days before.
Wow.
And so I don't want to paint it with a rosy, I don't want to put rosy colored glasses on.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
There's a lot of trauma that you have to overcome. There's sometimes lifetime damage that addiction from the mother has inflicted on the child.
Most of these kids are.
Definitely psychological damage. It's never easy. So
trauma. So all I have to say, we got married and I said, we're never doing foster care. We're never doing that. And God changed my heart big time, especially through, I started to study and teach the book of James, which is interesting because James is the earliest letter we have. It's really not even a letter. It's a collection of really probably sermons that Jacob, the real name of James, spoke, right? So the earliest writing we have from the New Testament being James, most likely. And at the beginning of the first chapter of James chapter 1, it says, this is pure and undefiled religion, that you would take care of the orphans and the widows in their distress.
That's right.
So that hit me, and I thought, well, it's just more of a principle. It's not really a command, But then I started looking at it, and, like you said, we study church history.
Yeah.
The probably seminal thing that separated Christians from every other way of thinking was the way they treated orphans and widows. Specifically, like you mentioned before, scooping up babies from next to a river that the Roman society had cast out because of convenience and furtherance of opulence, right?
Right.
Because these babies were thought to be hindrances.
Right.
So many of them, if they were women, little girls, toss them aside because a girl will marry one day and leave her.
And you have to provide a dowry for it.
You got to provide. It's going to cost you money. Well, the individual rights, to happiness and prosperity for the Roman empire. That's what's most important,
Right.
right? So we have that, and then if they were disabled
Yeah.
or anything like that.
So you got,
you
and
would
let's
toss these babies.
paint this picture. You got to remember that in Roman society, if you're a Christian, you kind of have one strike against you already. You're not part of the grander society, so it's not like you can shop at any store
Right.
or get any kind of work that you want.
Lower class.
You don't know if you're going to have one meal a day, let alone 3.
Yes.
And you're taking on maybe
Multiple.
a child
Yeah.
who's not going to be a farmhand, who's not going to help you in the field, who's got a crippled leg or what. It's an extra mouth to feed when food is scarce already. And the Christians were doing this. And this is why the Romans were completely baffled. They just could not understand this. Matter of fact, there started to be a little bit of a rumor. Maybe they're using them for child sacrifice.
Right, yeah, because of
the Eucharist. Yeah, the body and the blood. Oh, well, if they're eating flesh and drinking blood, maybe it's those. And that just shows that Twitter was around even in the Roman.
Well, and there
era.
was fake news
So,
because there
yeah.
was an investigative journalist
Yes.
that was sent into
Pliny.
the church. Yes, exactly. And he lied.
He
He
kind
said,
of,
"Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're eating babies."
So it's just
putting them on toast.
It was really bad.
It was insane.
It was the propaganda out there. It just goes to show that nothing's
new.
Nothing's new.
But if nothing's new under the sun, nothing should have changed.
Right.
In our intentions.
Right.
Because that was the modern day. There was no way to abort children except for to carry the child and throw it away.
They had some really risky procedures, mercury and stuff that they would try to put in the uterus but it would kill the women half the time too.
That's expensive.
Yeah, and it was for the elite.
You're better off. Well, and there's a whole other thing there parallel to what's happening now. But so now the modern abortion in the ancient day was throwing babies away.
Right.
The modern adoption in the ancient day was just picking them up and taking care of them and saying, no, these human beings have value to God. And like I said, most likely James's letters were preached.
Yeah.
So, and read in homes, in churches all over, in synagogues all over, because he actually talks about how we should conduct ourselves in synagogues. And so it's not, so I looked at that and thought, this had such a profound impact on people who were being persecuted for their beliefs, who were destitute, yet they still did it. Does it not apply to me today? Yeah. And I think the answer is yes. I'm not saying that I think that every Christian is called to adopt, but I think that if you want to see the world turned upside down like they did in the early church, give it a shot. And so that changed my heart. And so I said, yeah, we got to do this. And so we went through the process. It's a long process. They put you through, it was a year coming. In fact, again, we're sitting in my studio. The only reason this studio exists is because we needed an extra room in our house. And so it's going to cost you something. And so we ended up, I had a beautiful studio in the house. It's now my daughter's room.
Yeah.
And so we put up this tough shed and built it out. It cost us tens of thousands of dollars to do, and moved everything out here to have more space for another child. And so again, it's going to cost you something.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm the perfect example of all this, but I'm saying that it's one of the biggest blessings I've ever experienced in my entire life. So now we have a little girl, and all this culminates in a beautiful thing. And I'll try not to cry. I haven't slept in a while, so I cried. I think I cried at.
Oh yeah, new baby. Yeah, she's 2 weeks.
So we've had her 2.5 weeks. She is just over a month.
Okay.
And so I haven't slept very much. So everything makes me cry right now. I think I saw a Geico commercial and I cried.
Yeah.
So and it was a funny. So this little girl, very similar to the ancient day, her biological mother was using and many different drugs, so I won't go into, and had her basically at a crack house, in a tub at a crack house, and somebody called the police. They came. It's funny you mentioned, or one of you guys mentioned, is when they take their first breath.
Yeah.
When they're humans. Well, they came and she had not yet taken her first breath. As far as the paperwork goes, she was in respiratory distress. Was she not yet a human? And so they resuscitated her, took her to the NICU. She was, a preemie. And nobody came for that baby. Mother didn't come for the baby. She was born drug addicted. They had to wean her off. And so then we got the call, and they said, hey, we have a little girl for you. And so we, it was Thursday at 4 p.m., and I was thinking, I have the weekend ahead of me.
Right.
I'm going to get some schoolwork done. I'm going to chill, maybe play my guitar, have some fun. And it's going to be a pretty chill weekend. And then at 7 p.m., we had an infant.
Yeah.
And the church sprung into action, brought us all the stuff that we needed. My family brought us all the stuff that we needed.
Cool.
Overflowing with things. We
Yeah.
Great thing. And I'm holding this baby girl, which she didn't even have a name. Until recently, we named her now, but her name's Elena. But it was just baby girl was her name. Not even a name. Holding her in my arms, and I get a notification on my phone that Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, super cool. And I'll never forget that. It's going to be one of those moments that you never forget. It's kind of like 9/11. You always remember where we were. I'm always going to remember where I was. And I was filled with emotion because she could have been a statistic.
Oh, absolutely.
Easily could have been. In fact, but instead now she's my daughter, And so I can't look at her and say her life would have been better off never existing. And I thank God that her mother didn't go the route of abortion. I don't know what led her. Maybe it was because of the drug use and she was just too scared to go in and do it. Whatever it is, God protected that baby, had her set apart for us. And so I'm glad for that. But I'm glad that she didn't choose the path of abortion. And more women need to know. I think we can legislate all we want. We can vote all we want. The beautiful thing that's happening with Roe v. Wade being overturned is that now we get to have this conversation again. We had the conversation, but it was just legal. It was just what it is. Now we can convince and change hearts.
Yes.
Now we can say, now we have an opportunity to have our voices heard.
Well, immediately after the Dobbs decision,
Yes.
Up to 22 states had some kind of law that either triggered immediately upon the decision or within the next few days the legislature met to put certain restrictions. So nearly half the states now have some of them went back to 14 weeks or 15 weeks as a cutoff. And by the way, that's not, if you look at Europe, which is a hugely secular society, that's the standard in Europe is abortions are illegal after 14 weeks. There's only about 8 nations in the developed world that allow abortion at any point.
Yeah.
And it's the United States and it's a whole bunch of really kind of third world countries that are backwards in many of their other respects. But none of the, everybody points to Denmark and Sweden as these paradigms of how we should run ourselves, but they all have these limitations as well, because we recognize that it's just an arbitrary idea of where we're going to draw these lines.
It's a bad idea. So now we get to have this conversation, and I think, now some people are expected up to 26 states to completely.
Yeah, I'm sure more.
Which is the majority of Americans. So we see that the majority of Americans really don't feel. Even in recent polls, they were asking, what's a big issue for you on the ballot? Yeah. I think it was like 6% of people said that abortion was a big issue on the ballot.
It's not the biggest issue for them.
Most people are like, we don't really want abortion.
And it depends on how you, and be careful of the polls because it depends on how they frame the question. Do you care whether abortion is illegal?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very broad question. Should there be any restrictions on aborting children up to even 9 months? That's a different question, and people will answer those two questions very differently because the way the question is framed, and any pollster knows this, will elicit a different response.
Yeah. So I think for us moving forward as Christians, I think there's really kind of 3 things that I like to say we can do practically, and they all start with D.
Okay.
I'm a preacher. So we need to do 3 things. We need to deplete the demand.
Mm-hmm.
We need to deprive the reward, and then we need to disrupt the supply. We need to deplete the demand, deprive the reward, disrupt the supply. So as Christians, did you know that if one couple Christian couple out of every third church in America, not even every church. So every third church. So if there's 3 churches on your block, just one couple from one of those churches were to bring a child into their home out of the foster care system, there would be no more orphans in America. 0 orphans in America. A lot of what's cited now, especially on the left, is, again, Christians are pro-birth, but not pro-life.
Right.
So we need to deplete the demand. Deplete the demand. We need to say, there are so many Christians ready to receive your kid into their home and give them a beautiful life, that why would you ever put your body through abortion? Why would you? And not only that, but we'll bring you along. Are you expecting? Let us know.
Yeah.
I'll pay. You know, the meme right now is the couple that had the sign that says, "We'll adopt your baby,"
Right.
and now the left has turned it into a joke. You know.
Yeah.
They show. I think they superimposed 2 pit bulls on which I thought was pretty funny because pit bulls kill children. And then there was, I think it was Mark Hamill.
Yes.
Posted a photo of the Joker and Harley Quinn. We'll adopt your baby, and
Right.
so it's become a meme now because they're very good at mocking virtue. Anyway,
Again, child killers are there for the sacrifice, right? See, it's the same lie.
So deplete the demand. If there's no foster kids in the system, we've just cut off probably their main argument. Well, why would you bring another child into the world? There's already so many orphans in the world.
Yeah.
Well, we have the solve for that problem.
Yeah.
Quite easily, honestly. It just takes us. Now, not to sound so downer on it, because did you know that 5% of Christians adopt?
Yeah, like I said, it's a higher percentage than the normal population.
5% of Christians adopt. All other groups combined, it only makes up 2%.
Right.
So
over twice as many.
Over twice as many as far as a group goes.
Yes.
But we can make, back in the early church, it was probably closer to 80 to 100%, I would bet.
It was significant. I don't know. Obviously we don't.
Since
have
I
the
don't know,
stats
I'm
for
going to
that.
say 80 to 100%.
But we do have stories of specific individuals, and I can maybe we'll do a
There's
post.
a whole. This could be 4 hours long.
Yeah, it could
Anyway.
be. So I've got. I'll link. Tell you what. I have an article that links to specific heroes of the church who've saved kids, and I'll link to that at the in the description below. So
the next one is deprive the reward. This is more on a nuanced level, I think. So you deprive the reward. What does that even mean? Well, I mean, obviously, Planned Parenthood is going to take a big old hit.
Yeah.
Now that Roe v. Wade.
well, they closed many, and isn't it interesting that the selling point that Roe would say, well, abortions are only 3% of our business,
Yeah, no,
and they
they're
started closing
Yeah.
all of their
Lies.
clinics in all of the states that have banned abortion. Wait a minute, if that's only 3% of your organization's business, why are you closing? It's because of creative accounting practices.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
It was how they managed that.
So that gets into legislature. You know,
Yeah,
that you got to
absolutely.
vote. If you're Christian and you're not voting, you're not exercising all the tools in your toolbox. You really need to be voting. You need to be out there. You need to be educated on who supports what. All these different things. So deprive the reward, but also even deeper than that. I saw a lot of Christians getting really upset over Netflix producing this Cuties.
Oh yes,
Remember that about a year ago? And they're like, I am so upset. I'm going to sign a petition for them to remove it. It's like, why don't you just cancel your Netflix subscription? Deprive the reward. Take your money out of places. Now that gets a slippery slope because
it's
like
tough.
there are a lot of it's funny. I saw just a list of companies that said
Right.
they would pay for their employees to go and get abortions, and I was so grieved to see so many of the companies that I love so much. Apple, I have a Tesla, and Tesla even said they would do that, and everybody's celebrating Elon Musk as some conservative, but
He's Elon Musk,
yeah, but fine, he's doing great things, and so I was grieved. I'm like, well, I really can't. I'm going to pull my money out of everything. You can't do that.
Yeah, you can't.
But out of the culturally relevant things that are moving people towards secularism, maybe it's time for us to put our money in other places. And so or just withdraw from that altogether.
Yeah.
So deprive the reward. Take your money out of the places where you know it's going to promote sexual promiscuity. It's going to promote all those secularism. And then so deplete the demand, deprive the reward. What was the other one I said? I don't know. Anyway, I should know
the supply.
Yeah, disrupt the supply.
Disrupt the supply.
Disrupt the supply. We got to get back to teaching biblical virtues as far as sexuality goes. We've become such a sexually free culture, and it's permeated the church.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit about that next time as well. So,
yeah. So do those three things, and that's a long conversation.
Yeah,
but
it is. And one of the interesting things that's happening even secularly today is abortions were down because sexual promiscuity was down, in the sense that kids are just tired of hooking up. They just got burnt out by it. And so it's just
found alternatives.
So, and there's the whole self-satisfaction.
There's that, and there's also a rise of, in a weird way, this is going to become a thing. There's also a rise of, 30% of Gen Z identifies as non-binary.
Yes, there's that.
So there's a lot of that going on too.
Same-sex
interactions
stuff, and things of that nature deal with it as well. But in general, there's a malaise and there's a depression among kids, so that it's not the exciting forbidden fruit that it used to be in that regard. It'll never go away. Sexual deviancy is always going to be part of us, because we've seen that in every other culture.
Yeah. It's kind of the beautiful glass sculpture that is created from the lightning strike on the sand.
Right.
The lightning strike was tragic, but now there's a little bit of a silver lining to it,
Right. So, exactly. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm glad to have you guys with me, and we'll put, like I said, some of the links down below. We'll also talk about some of the objections. For example, I have an article about, would you, if you're in a laboratory where the fire's burning, one room there's 5 babies, another room there's 5,000 embryos. Which one would you save? Those kinds of moral dilemmas that are an attempt to show that we're inconsistent. We have to address those. Yeah. Can't do that here today, but I'll link those in the description as well.
Those are good.
But thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time as we talk about more issues. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.